Welcome back to this very important Gauteng Provincial Government midterm review. What has happened so far, we've had the Premier of Gauteng, Premier Makhura, who's delivered that midterm review for the better part of the last hour, and some very, very important points have come out of that. What would happen later on, we'll have many of the participants here in the auditorium who'd be asking the Premier some questions, as well as representatives from his management team. I'm talking about the MECs as well. But it was part of the plan, and I talked both through CNBC Africa, but certainly to the people here. As part of the plan, the Premier of Gauteng has invited expert opinion long before the release of the plan to get their thoughts with the plan of possibly modifying some of the opinions. And many people have responded, and I think that's been fantastic. What has happened now, we've picked out 4 of the many who have responded, and they're going to get a chance now to effectively deliver their own opinions on that report. So the plan is we'll get them to talk for about 5 minutes each, uninterrupted, and then I'll have a chat, or we'll have a debate with them as well as with the Premier, and that should take us about roughly in total about 35 minutes, 40 maximum. And if there's a chance, we may have a very short tea break thereafter before we have that final session of an hour. So let me then do this. Of course, on my right-hand side is the well-known Premier of Gauteng Premier, David Makhura. Once again, thank you for your time. We also have amongst the 4 panelists, Professor Modimowabarwa Kanyane, who's from the HSRC. He's the Research Director in the Democracy, Governance and Service Delivery Research Program of the HSRC. Appreciate you giving of your time. Thank you. The second of the 4 panelists, Pamela Mondliwa, who's from University of Johannesburg, the Research Center for Competition, Regulation and Economic Development. Big responsibility you clearly have. Appreciate you giving of your time there. And the third of the 4 panelists, Abdullah Verachia from GIBS. He's a senior faculty member, head of the Center for Leadership Dialogue at the Gordon Institute of Business Science. Abdullah, appreciate you giving of your time. And the 4th of the panelists is Kerwin Lebone, who's from the SAIRR, South African Institute of Race Relations. He's the head of this all-important risk analysis. Appreciate your time. So this is the plan. We're going to start first up, and I've got them in running order in terms of where we go. So we're going to start first up with Professor Kanyane for 5 minutes or so roughly, if you can assist us with time, to effectively deliver a verdict, and that's really what it is, right, on what you've just heard. So go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I think the province, with the radical transformation, modernization and reindustrialization, the province have a trajectory. And also the province has a monitoring and evaluation instrument. I would say also that province has a radar screen to be able to put everything on check. And that came from the presentation by the Premier. But what is more critical also is that if we tried to look all the challenges that have been put across, and especially with poverty, inequality, and unemployment, we should also look beyond just the end of the term. We should cast this beyond that, because it is a long-term project, which I believe that we should not lose this momentum. And what comes very critically also is that we want to see this capable, strong government that has been ushered and unleashed, especially with public scrutiny, to continue also beyond the term. And we want to look at this trajectory with the strides that go beyond that. And I think that we should not trip ourselves by just looking at the end of the term. The critical issue, which I think came from this midterm review, is the massification of the rollout of the employment opportunities, especially for the young people. I'm very happy when the Premier talks about the TEPO 1 million. But it is also very much important to underscore, to hear now the voices of the young people. What are they saying over and above what we are introducing them to them? And already there are spin-offs, so we need to hear some of the voices, because we find that there could be some mixed voices that are emerging there. So that is a citizen engagement that needs to come strongly. the last thing which I want to put across is that the message from the Premier should also recognize, once it is recognizing the basic education, it should also recognize the impact of the universities that have made in the province. We acknowledge that we have top-notch universities here in South Africa with the footprints in the province. We also need to assess that kind of the impact, especially on the skilling and the research hub as the engine room to sustain this medium-term review. And I think this is what we need to pull together, all the strings. It should not be the government that is in the forefront. All the partners, the players need to be integrated to respond to these challenges. In this way, we can able to maximize our efforts to overcome the challenges that we come across.
Thank you. Well, there you are. That's called service delivery, by the way. We asked for 5 minutes, you do it in 3 minutes. So that's incredibly speedy. I'm very, very impressed indeed. Which doesn't mean you have more time, Pamela, but perhaps let's go to you, Pamela Mondliwa from the University of Johannesburg. Go ahead.
I'm going to comment on two pillars that came out of the review and the Premier mentioned, and that is reindustrialization and Africa's industrial revolution. I think on reindustrialization, the Premier noted South Africa and the Gauteng's early deindustrialization. And this is a big problem given manufacturing's importance in creating employment, particularly through linkages. So we, very much looking forward to the implementation of the strategies that he mentioned. And within the implementation of those strategies, what will be necessary to bring about the reindustrialization that, that has been noted is having coordinated interventions for the particular sectors that, that have been identified. There was also a note around monopolies, but what you really need to address monopolies is you need competition. So then the Gauteng needs to be supporting entrants to be able to compete with those monopolies. That means that you need to be looking at not just financing, because financing, though important, is enough, but there are other barriers to entry that firms are facing, and the province can assist to overcome. There's also the issue around, I think, public procurement, which came up in the medium-term review. Though this is important, it only covers certain type of products. So there are other routes to market that the province needs to be looking to support. There's retail. So what are the local governments doing in terms of zoning regulations or approvals to ensure that there's space for entrance and new developments? These are the things that we'd also like to see coming through in the strategies that the province then implements. I think one of the sectors that have been identified as losing capabilities was machinery. And this is particularly concerning because this is one of the sectors that have advanced capabilities in Gauteng. So, I noted in the press, I think a few weeks ago, that the province is now engaging with business in order to establish a cluster. So this, is very welcome and very supported and will actually assist in bringing about this coordinated interventions that I'm talking about. So we're looking forward to see what the outcomes will be from those initiatives. And then the second thing that I wanted to talk about was the Africa's industrial revolution. The Midterm Report notes about all the strategies that are going to be put into place about increasing exports to the region. And this is all very important. However, I think we also need to note that it's not just about improving South Africa's exports to the region, but how we can grow the region as a whole. As the region grows, then the market for South Africa also gets bigger. So these are things around aligning the interventions between Gauteng and other provinces in the countries. If you think about something as simple as infrastructure, this is one of the biggest barriers to inter-regional change in SADC. If we could align infrastructure rollout between Gauteng province and the provinces that are nearer to the borders, that would mean more seamless movement of goods between the provinces. So we'd like to see more discussion of alignment of policies between the different countries and regions within the different countries in order to achieve this, the Africa's new industrial revolution. And I think I'll end there.
Okay, well, there you are. Thank you for that as well, Pamela. Let's move on then to the third of the delegates here, the panelists. That's Abdullah Verachia from GIBS. Go ahead.
Thanks. I think, Premier, let me start by saying that I'm a son of Mpumalanga, so that's the province I grew up in, but I came to Gauteng 17 years ago for studies, for a career, and for an incredible last 17 years. And I say this because the small landmass, as you said, of Gauteng houses the dreams, the aspirations, the hopes, and the fears of millions of South Africans. I do one exercise in every single class I teach at GIBS. I ask everybody who grew up in Gauteng, people like you, Ashraf, and the majority of people have actually come into Gauteng because this is really the economic heartland of Africa. We say that Gauteng is the center of the center of the center of the African economy. And so that places an incredible burden, a responsibility, but also an opportunity for all of us here. I've had the privilege of working closely with your MECs and senior officials and yourself in your administration in the last 2.5 years. And I'm always heartened by the energy, by the verve, by the foresight in which you've tackled the last 2.5 years in this province. So I woke up this morning with this tendency of man flu. Last night I struggled, and my wife said to me, should I cancel your appointments today? And I said, I can't. I've got to be here to be able to engage with something that's critical and close to my heart. Because I often say that South Africa's a wayward yet exciting, a scary but phenomenally exciting 23-year-old young adult. And some of the warts that we start to see emerging is as a consequence of some of the systemic issues that you've raised, some of the systemic issues around a very high income inequality that we have in this province, a province that I often say has got the largest Porsche dealership in the world, but really has significant challenges in terms of people living below $1.50 a day. And for me, this leaves me restless. It leaves me unsettled. And so I wanted to touch on 2 or 3 things that I think are critical for me, because I think that everybody talks about elephants in the room. For me, the elephant in the room is the fact that in 23 years, we still have systemic challenges that continue to inhibit the growth and aspiration of young people. Our children grow up in a democracy that has to contend with this interplay between excitement and fear. And that's why Tsepo 1 million is so important in terms of integrating young people into the fabric of society in Gauteng. And so for me, there are 4 or 5 things that I've picked up and I've noted in terms of the phenomenal engagement that you've had with us in the last hour. The first one is the World Economic Forum in Durban took place from the 3rd to the 5th of May. And the WEF in Davos this year spoke about the 4th industrial revolution, this period of disruptive change and a digital economy. But underpinning that is really the massive opportunity, and we see this in 2 case studies in Silicon Valley and Bangalore. So I often use the case study of Bangalore because many people think that Bangalore is as a consequence of Indian people having an affinity towards the IT sector. Maybe I'm not that, I don't have any affinity to it. But Indian people don't necessarily have this affinity to the IT sector. It really was a coordinated and concerted effort between the public sector, the private sector, academia, civil society, and skills to be able to create competitive advantage in the IT sector. Today, Bangalore employs 5 million people directly in the IT sector and 8 million people indirectly in the IT sector. So this concerted effort in the late 90s to be able to create a competitive base of advantage in terms of IT, ICT. And we see this in Silicon Valley as well. And I'm heartened when I see some of the developments in the inner city of the CBD around how we're creating this industrial cluster around ICT, because this will really, I think, accelerate opportunities in terms of growth and using this pivot of digital and the transformation of digital. The second one, Premier, is really, I worry about the fact that we haven't dealt with the psychological impact of a very difficult past in this country. I had the privilege 2 weeks ago on a Sunday evening to go to Robben Island with a group of 40 executives and 20 youth. And we were told we were going to go through a day in the life of a prisoner. And we went there with the vantage in terms of what to expect. When we got off the ferry, things fundamentally changed. You were shackled, and we went through exactly the same experience that prisoners went through when they went to Robben Island. Everything from delineation on your type of dress to the type of food based on your race. So an Indian prisoner, which I would have been given long pants and a long shirt. I was an African prisoner, so I was given short pants. And we went through a very tough psychological process. And many of the people who came through when we went on the ferry thought, yeah, this is going to be interesting. But when they left, and that night at 11 o'clock at night, we had a facilitated dialogue that I facilitated. And one very senior executive said, in 28 years of being in the corporate sector, I've never understood with empathy what people have gone through in this country. I've never understood with empathy the struggle that this freedom have had to, and the sacrifices that we had to pay. And maybe I'll close with these 2 things. There's a fascinating book by Rory Stein around one step behind Mandela. And he speaks about 1997 and this routine that Nelson Mandela had every morning, waking up at 4:30 to go for a jog. And he says on this particular morning, he knocked on the door of Nelson Mandela, the former president of this country, to wake up at 4:30, and nobody opened the door. At 4:45, nobody opened the door. At 5 o'clock, nobody opened the door, and obviously he was quite frenetic that what has happened to this global icon and statesman. He says he goes to the manager and he convinces him to open the door of the hotel room, and they find that President Mandela is not there, and they're obviously now overwhelmed. And they call the security forces, the MI6 or whatever it is in Britain, and the police, and they comb 6 kilometers of the radius of this hotel to go out and to go and look as to whether and what has happened. They eventually, 3.4 kilometers down the road, find President Mandela sitting on a park bench on his own in central London. And he says, I didn't think this through, but I should have thought about it. But I go to President Mandela and I shake him and I say, what did you do? I am responsible for you. And President Mandela says, I've had 27 years of being in prison, but I continue to be imprisoned. People tell me where to go and when to go and how to go and what I should do. He said, in Robben Island, when I go to the bathroom, and nobody used to look at the bathroom before. Now, before I go to the bathroom and I'm desperate, you people tell me I need to clean the bathroom first. And this tells us that the psychology of this country we haven't dealt with. And that's why this issue of social cohesion is so important. It's so close to our heart. It's so important for this province because when we engage with empathy, and when MEC Creasy's department tells us that we live in a period of spatial transformation where people of this country spend 40% of their disposable income reached 6 billion. It's a fantastic case study, and we as business schools love case studies. But I think we must translate this case study into how the private sector can support this to be able to also allow for procurement from the private sector. If we see 500 phenomenal large companies in this province also procuring the majority of their stuff from township economies, and you've created the case study, then we create radical economic transformation. Not echo chamber conversations, but really transformation that will have real and meaningful impact. And for me, these are some of the elements, and I hope we can engage further during this discussion, that are particularly close to my heart, but I think important in terms of some of the vexing issues, the challenges, but also the opportunities in this province.
That's Abdullah Verachia. Well, we're glad you stuck around in Gauteng. It didn't go back to Mpumalanga. Very important. From the Gordon Institute of Business Science. The fourth of the panelists, the last of the four, Kerwin Lebone, is from the South African Institute of Race Relations, the head of risk analysis. Go ahead.
My contribution will be in the form of two brief submissions with regards to two pillars. One is housing and the other is crime. But before I do that, I'd like to thank the Premier for mentioning us in his report. I see he's got a publication that he quotes here, and if everyone in here will indulge me, if I can just quote the first and last sentences of this excerpt. And it goes thus. It's from a publication from a study we published in November 2016. It's Life in South Africa, Reasons for Hope. And it's quoted thus. As we face the future, we must not lose sight of the fact that life is better today than it was 20 years ago. And the last sentence is, good analysis of South Africa are those that are able to read the good with the bad and tolerate the apparent contradictions to reach conclusions that say, yes, we have problems, but we have also made remarkable progress that serves as a foundation upon which we can build a much better country. Thanks a lot once again, Premier. But here's the thing, on housing, if I look at StatsSA's latest figures, 40% of all informal dwellings are located in this province, which shows you what the Premier was talking about in terms of the challenges of in-migration. So the brief submission I'm making is that as a recommendation to MEC Paul Mashatile, is that they should try and manage the tensions, because in terms of housing, many of the protests, there are protests that have genuine concerns behind them, and especially in terms of electricity. And if you look at all the studies and surveys done on protests, you will see that they usually spike around winter when there are blackouts and stuff. And so there's genuine concerns there. But in terms of housing, this is not the first time. In fact, we have been accused at the IRR by opposition parties and others that we are praising us for government, because biannually we release a progress report of what government service delivery progress is. And we've said it's very impressive. And we've had people saying we are praising us, otherwise they'll say that we have been captured by the ruling party, which is not true, I must say. The thing is, in terms of housing delivery, we have said that the government's record is so impressive that it has created heightened expectations that there are communities who will go and protest on the basis that their neighboring communities have become better. And in that regard, there's one anecdote that I have that will try and illustrate this point. Towards the end of last year, there were floods in the Jacques River region of Alexandra. And I remember MEC Barbara Creasy and MEC Mashatile went there. And if I'm not wrong, the MEC for Finance pledged 20 million to help those people. But that's the thing about that area. It has given birth to two very large townships. One is Diepsloot and the other is Brownfisherville near Dobsonville in Soweto. The thing is that there's a recycling of beneficiaries from that area that I think should be looked at for one simple reason, that it creates tensions, because there are people who, by virtue of being in that area when there's a disaster, they automatically jump the housing queue. And there are people, as latest that survey information shows that there are over 500,000 households that have been on the housing waiting list for over 9 years. Now you can imagine when they are still there waiting for the houses and they learn that it's quicker to actually be helped by government. If you are in that kind of situation, you will create a situation where you create perverse incentives for people to really invade land so that they can jump the queue. That's one recommendation I'm making, that they should manage that so as to the tensions. In terms of crime, I was looking recently at also I agree with the Premier that crime is a very, very big concern for Gauteng residents, particularly residents of the Johannesburg CBD. And one thing, I don't know if that has been looked at by the security cluster, but also perhaps MEC Mashatile can help in this regard. There are a lot of disused buildings in the CBD that are being used as operating headquarters by various crime people. If maybe the MEC can go and shut those down as a matter of agency. That's my contribution.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. So there you are, the contribution from the four panelists. What I'll do is, these things change slightly. I think we've got about 15 or 20 minutes roughly to spend time with, because I think we do have space now for a short tea break of 10 minutes. Just now, not quite now. So we'll have the panel with us, as well as the Premier, for about 20 minutes. Then that short break for tea, and then we'll have at least an hour, I think, quite comfortably before we end up at 1 o'clock. Right. So what I'm going to do now is this. I was going to say we're going to run it like a TV or radio show. In fact, we are now doing that anyway because of CNBC Africa coming on board, right? So I may want to put some questions to yourself, Premier, or to any of the four panelists, but I'm also suggesting it's less about speech and more about quick soundbite talk, okay? So even as we ask questions, it's open to every one of you to almost remove the decorum of saying, well, I'll wait for a chance. If you need to say something, just raise your hand so I can see you, and feel free to try and even get in. Because I think what we want from an audience point of view is we want some good rousing debate, which will actually help everybody ultimately to benefit. Premier, I'm going to start with you. You made the point about, it's not GDP that is an issue to the masses, but it's about the number of jobs. So in the same principle, it's one thing having the midterm report saying a lot of different things. And you also said earlier on that as we get to 2019, if there are people as part of your MECs are not delivering, there must be an accountability level, and then they must be fired, right? But let's then deal with the midterm. In terms of, when I say you, yourself, your MECs, the people who run Gauteng, where do you rate yourself as a province? And at the back of my mind, of course, I'll be asking that question, in terms of how you rate yourself, would you as an administration consider what many of the people are saying, that actually you're not delivering as a province, never mind what we've just heard just now?
Well, firstly, let me appreciate the feedback from the panelists. I think a lot of the issues they have raised are issues we have been working on. Some of the panelists, like Pamela and Abdullah, we work together, especially on the economic issues, very, very closely. And I also want to appreciate the feedback from Professor Kanyane. Certainly, Prof, the many issues you have raised, I agree with, and members of our cabinet are here. They can bear me out. I agree with you that we have to translate the trajectory, what you said, there's a trajectory and the radar screen, that we have to translate this into a partnership with the universities and the research institutions. I am meeting with the vice chancellors this week, and that's not the first meeting. We have a forum with all the vice chancellors of the universities in Gauteng. We work very closely. The Innovation Hub works very closely also with the research centers like the CSIR. So that partnership is something we value. It's a partnership on many issues, including on innovation, the role of the universities in R&D and innovation. A partnership as well with business. I think many of the business people will tell you that they have never had it so good in terms of government coming to them and not they being called to summits in this province. So the amount of time myself and MEC Maile spent in doing what we call factory visits, FAM, going in all the 5 corridors in Gauteng. We go and meet. We don't want a talk at a place that's remote from the reality of business. So we visit industry leaders at firm level to look at the contribution of particular businesses in the province and South African economy as a whole, but in that region. Like last week we were in Sidibeng looking at ArcelorMittal, the steel manufacturer, and what we have been working with them over the past at least 2 years. They are turning around pretty well now. Some of the major issues of the decline of the steel industry, the prospects are very good. Some of the advice we've been getting from GIBS and the University of Johannesburg and vets who we have worked with on these issues of sector by sector and company by company. What does the contribution of this business mean? If it collapses, what will be the impact on the economy and how many on households? So I am very glad that we have a very strong partnership emerging, and it's not based on talk. The business people, area by area, sector by sector, we go with the mayors. 3 weeks ago, we were in the West Rand meeting with Busmark, the bus manufacturer, the manufacturer of the BRTs. There are things we're working with them on turning around, improving that business so it can create more jobs. We're doing exciting things in Ekurhuleni with the capital equipment manufacturers. So we're doing so with the automotive industry in Tshwane. So in every region in our province, we're working with business. We're also working with civil society leaders who are here today on various social and economic programs, including the township economy. What does it mean also for the church? We want that they are located in the townships and dealing with the various issues. So I definitely agree. Without a partnership, we can't get anywhere. And my own sense is that often we insult each other and swear at each other, government and business playing holier than thou. But the real difference is we have to soil our hands. We have to look at the real issue, sometimes not too much of the macro and global stuff. That's important, but we have to get down to business. What makes this business to grow or to close down? And again, last week I faced a terrible story of a business that's closing down. Again, in the Val, how many people will lose jobs? When you talk to these workers on the shop floor, that business is closing and they are affected. It turns you around, I think even the most hardened bureaucrat, and I go around with the bureaucrats, even the most hardened bureaucrats looks at this with great deal of sensitivity. What can we do to save jobs? So I want to emphasize that really action and action where it matters. If it's community issues, we have to be there. MEC Mashatile has been on the ground. To have a press conference and blame the people is not leadership. Go there where the heat is and sit down with the people and solve the problem. Sit down with business, solve the problem.
There could be some other points you may want to add, but maybe just this important one. When you walk the streets of Gauteng, you know, the cities and the townships, what do they say about how they view the service delivery in terms of that question I asked earlier on? How do they grade Gauteng's performance, and how do you grade Gauteng's performance, either in an out of 10 or an ABC?
Well, I think the verdict will always be with the citizens. I respect that. But what's the citizen feedback? The best citizen feedback in Gauteng is what's called the Gauteng City Region Observatory surveys that are conducted every 2 years. And then there's research done. If you look at the South African Institute of Race Relations, what they say there, it's amazing. So there's independent verifications, but we go also, Ashraf, we go to Nteresano community meetings. People tell us, you are doing so well here. So there's no sense that the people don't appreciate the progress. That's not the world we live in. So someone who sits somewhere else and just read newspapers or watch television. But if you go to people, they are very clear that here you are doing well, guys. But and let me tell you, they're able to appreciate one thing they say on education we are doing well. And they will then say, but you know what, the demand for more schools. And then that will put pressure.
How much time are they giving
on the township economy? They'll say on the township economy, this is for the first time we really feel the township entrepreneurs are part of the big deal. They are not just left behind. And then they'll say, but yes, let's open up opportunities for big business so that they don't depend just on government procurement. And we have a strategy there. Some businesses are responding very well. Okay. So if you ask me, I think 2.5 years down the line, the report tells that story. We have done very well in certain areas, but we have to do much more because the task is huge. To govern Gauteng, to be the governor of a province like Gauteng, I think requires 3 times what I would say may be required from being probably the president of another country. Somewhere
I thought you were going to say USA.
The president of another country. So you can't sleep. These MECs, when you see them here, they sleep with their phones on the sides. You might be called by a community, things are burning down. And you see them there in action. But the results have to be, we have to make greater impact because the problems are deep.
All right, I'm going to engage the panelists.
May I also say I'm very happy with my team. The 10 MECs I have expect no cabinet reshuffle now.
So you've got a dream team, a winning team.
I'm very happy with my team.
All right. So we don't expect a reshuffle?
No cabinet reshuffle on the cards. So we are signing delivery agreements. They have a job to do over the next 2 years. We have to turn this province into a construction site where jobs are created and where businesses are growing, where young people are included, where black businesses growing as well. They are part of the mainstream. And where houses are built and transport is working.
All right, we'll engage
and crime is going down.
Well, we'll engage the panelists in a minute. Well, I mean, that point is well made. I think Gauteng has this slogan of the province of champions. We are sitting right now in the midst of, we're talking soccer, where the PSL champions reside at Wits University. Yes. Just a point well made anyway, right? But having said, but having said that, perhaps I want to get maybe the panelists to engage, and it's open to any one of you, right? How then do you account for, and we're not talking of other provinces, service delivery, dissatisfaction, that translates into violent opposition. Any one of you, would you like to answer that? How would you translate that to the comment made by the Premier when people are saying, we're happy with what you're doing, we want more of this, but we're happy. And yet we see disruption now taking place on a daily basis in this province. Who wants to go for it?
If I can just come in quickly. As the Premier mentioned, Gauteng is the economic hub, not only of the entire country, but of the continent as well. Everyone is trying to come in here to find a job. And the proliferation of informal dwellings as well, to such an extent that you can consider informal dwellings as an indicator of heightened economic activity. Look at our provinces, you won't find many informal dwellings in places such as Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, and Limpopo, precisely because there's no demand there for housing next to economic opportunities. That creates an extra pressure on things such as infrastructure, provision of water, sanitation, and housing as well. So that the problem of in-migration is a very huge problem for Gauteng, and very unique in terms of how it attracts. Well, maybe to a lesser extent, the Western Cape also has that problem, but Gauteng attracts many people from various areas, including outside the continent, which is why there'll always be an added pressure for delivery of services.
You know, it's something, I mean, we know, we've read many books about, and then we talk about this city, Gauteng or Johannesburg paved with gold. It hasn't quite worked out like that for many people. Let me bring you in on this one, Pamela. You made the point earlier on about, you know, some of the economic issues that are critically important. But how then do you actually upskill that extra the 500,000 we spoke about to the 1 million to ensure that issue of, you know, let's call it delinquency does not happen? And we know it's happening because the issues of crime and drugs are all related to this. How do we embark on a drive that it becomes an urgent drive in the way that we had, 7 years ago in hosting the 2010 World Cup?
I mean, I think what the province has done in terms of really trying to focus on sectors is really important, because really manufacturing is where you create employment. And it's not only the employment that will be created in manufacturing, but their linkages to other services that are provided. So your engineering design services, even cleaning and security services become part of that. So for every job that you create in manufacturing, you're also creating other jobs either along the value chain or through others. So the focus on trying to ensure that we are upscaling and are addressing the deindustrialization such that we are moving towards reindustrialization will be a very important aspect of addressing the problem of unemployment. But with that is also skills development. The Premier mentioned that there's a mismatch between the skills that are provided in education institutions versus what the firms require. I mean, this is a big problem, and there have been initiatives such as the Gauteng Tooling Initiative and other initiatives that the Premier mentioned this today. But we really need to look at that question more carefully and try to understand exactly what it is that we should be delivering from a skills development. So the people that are leaving the FET colleges, can they go into manufacturing factories and actually be able to work quite quickly?
Yes?
Well, I mean, from our engagements with the firms when we were doing work for the province was that the answer was no, which is why then within the strategies that have been drafted that are being and will continue to be implemented, that is something that will be addressed. So this is why I was placing emphasis on implementation.
Okay, we'll get to Abdullah in a second. You wanted to say something, I think, on education earlier. Did you want to say something?
No.
When the Premier touched on universities, perhaps? I'm not too sure.
No, I was just reflecting on the service delivery, you know, and also signing service delivery agreement, you know. So I wish that if that could have even started from the start of their term, not midway when they are left with 2 years to come and and showcase what they have done. But I think that's a good starting point. We cannot lose it out. That's when I talk a sustainable governance system, the machinery of the state, the machinery of the province, need to be so much oiled that it can even sustain to respond to all these issues that we are raising. The critical issue here, which is an elephant in the room, is poverty, unemployment, and inequalities. And the statistics are just showing that we have serious challenges there. How do we become radical? How do we become robust? That would mean that we need to punctuate some of these actions and respond them with a strong governance system that is unleashing. But my worry is that we sometimes lose this appetite when the end of the term comes, because everything that to begin to change and take different shape and forms, and then we lose that momentum.
Okay, we'll pick up on that. Abdullah, your example of Robben Island certainly got me thinking. Having made 3 visits there and the last one in December, I'm very upset that I didn't go your route, because I think I would have learned so much, right? But maybe it's a good chance for you to answer that point made by the Premier about palpable social tension.
Sure.
How do we resolve that, which is the rich are predominantly not black, right? The poor are predominantly black. They're also the majority of the population. We know that much. I'm on a WhatsApp group. I live in Greenside. The biggest debate in some areas is about, can I get a job? And I have no money for the next year, or I have no housing. But in my suburb, the biggest debate is the dogs are barking, and there's a bit of too much loud noise next door, or whatever. I mean, it is as pronounced as that, and you know that. Yeah. So how do we deal with this palpable social tension, which just happens to be divided roughly along racial lines because of the inequality that existed because of apartheid? That may change 50 years down the line.
So I think we've got to open up the valves to be able to allow for more appreciation and understanding of the other. I think we've got into a society where we love talking to each other in echo chambers. So we love talking to people who have a similar economic mindset to us, who have the similar view in terms of how the economy should be managed. And the moment somebody comes with an alternative view, we tend to shut them down. But I think we must have more honest and open conversations in terms of people who come with alternative views and who really speak to them. So you spoke about the 2010 World Cup, which was a magical period that I try and bottle and understand. What is it that even led the scabangos in this country to go on strike? This country was a beautiful period in 2010, right? And that's where we had heightened social cohesion. We had people who found each other at fan parks and said, we want to understand each other. And then it ended on the 6th of July. And we've now had this increasing and I think widening racial class tension that has started to emerge. And for me, that's a particular concern, because if I can't understand and appreciate the context of the other, then I've got significant challenges. So let me give you one anecdote. In January this year, I was having breakfast at home, and the person who works with us in our family walked in, and we were having breakfast, and she said to me that her neighbor is going through a difficult period. And I said, why? She said, because the daughter and her son of her neighbor are unable to go to school. And I said, why? And she said, because for the last 3 weeks, they haven't been able to afford school uniforms. And I said, the Constitution is very clear around the right to free education, whether you have a school uniform or not. The problem I have is that the Constitution is expedient to certain individuals. Our courts, we fought this democracy, we're fighting this democracy in the court system and the judicial system because it's expedient, but we haven't been able to translate that Constitution into meaningful impact to the lives of the very people of our country. And I worry about that. So I follow MEC Lesufi quite a bit on Facebook. I love what you're doing in terms of smart classrooms. I don't agree with the swallows part, but we'll have another conversation around that. But I think what's beautiful about smart classrooms is I think young people in this country were not born in 94 and 1990. That warm, fuzzy feeling around what democracy has meant for them isn't as real to their lives as what it is to many of us sitting in this room, because we lived through that period. And so I did an exercise 2 weeks ago. We hosted 2,500 young children at GIBS from different economic vantage points, and we bring them together to try and connect with each other. And I asked them 5 questions in a survey around historical context. And I can tell you now, and it saddens me, that 90% of them got all of those answers wrong. And I worry that many of our young people are forgetting history. We're caught up in all of the other factors, but history is the foundation of where we are today. So we've got to talk about the historical context of this country, not through textbooks, but through getting people to appreciate the context. And we live in this province where we've got the beauty of Orlando, we've got the beauty of the Apartheid Museum, we've got so many other things, and I think we must have lots more around experiential learning. And lastly, perhaps, Ashraf, I spent some time with an MBA group from one of the large business schools in London last week. And they came to me after having 2.5 days here. And the professor came to me and said, Abdullah, we've had 9 engagements. We're tired of hearing about the ratings downgrade and the political challenges. Can you give us a different view of South Africa? And I quickly reorientated and I said, I want to tell you the real South Africa. The real South Africa is the phenomenal social entrepreneurs that are having significant impact in our province and our country. It's people that are fundamentally addressing societal issues such as health and education through unique models of doing it. And I think, and Premier, I say this with a huge sense of humility, that I think government takes too much of the responsibility of addressing societal challenges. I think it's a collective responsibility. And I think you've got to tell more of the story of the magic of Gauteng that sits out there. So I was in London a few months ago and I was given a front page of a GQ magazine which says that Johannesburg's the cool capital of the Southern Hemisphere. Yeah. I don't think many people in Johannesburg know that. We need to tell the story.
Do you want to pause and get
cool
some applause for that? Just saying, yeah. Okay.
The JSE accounts for more than 65% of portfolio investments into this continent. We've got to tell these stories because that's when we're able to create the sense of belonging in terms of what South Africa
but let's
really
get this right. Are you suggesting that there's too much responsibility on government, more should be with province, as opposed to too much on government, more should be, you know, business, civil society? What are you talking about?
So I think it's having the real conversations, that it's a collective responsibility in terms of how do we create competitiveness, how do we create inclusive economic growth, how do we create a prosperous type of economic and socio-economic environment where we all can participate. I think the majority of South Africans want to participate in an economy that's inclusive, that engages them. But I think you've got to understand the context of the other. And let me give you an example. You chat to a global multinational and they'll tell you that their primary responsibility is towards global shareholders. You talk to a JSE listed company and they'll tell you their primary responsibility is towards shareholders. But when they start engaging and realizing that there's a much broader societal responsibility, Michael Porter now speaks of this concept of shared value. And I'll tell you why I spoke about this overall responsibility. At the 2013 BRICS Summit, I was sitting next to the Indian minister, one of the Indian ministers. 2.5 days he'd been here, and he said to me, Ashraf, that I love South Africa, but I haven't liked the last 2.5 days. And I got quite offended, and I said, Minister, why? He says, every South African I've spoken to in the last 2.5 days, academics, politicians, business leaders, civil society leaders, say South Africa shouldn't be part of the BRICS. He said, it's Abdullah, it's as if you've been invited to be part of a great football team. I'm adding this part, like Liverpool. You get put on the field, you get a great kit, and then you say, I shouldn't be here. I should be in the B League or the C League. He says, you've been invited to be part of the BRICS. You might not have the same GDP or population, but there's a reason you've been invited. He says, Abdullah, South Africa's got a six-pack that I haven't seen in any other country in the world. I said, what do you mean the six-pack? He says, one, there's no other country of your size and scale that's managed to create the amount of global and regional multinationals that you have. It's phenomenal, and we can name them and we can rattle them. He says, secondly, you've never seen another emerging market with your sophistication of infrastructure that you have in South Africa that creates an enabling environment. He says, thirdly, you live on the foothold of the most exciting, most explosive growth opportunity called Africa with 1 billion people, and you behave as if you're in Nicaragua. He says, everybody I speak to says we're going into Africa. It's like me sitting in Delhi and saying I'm going into India. It doesn't make sense. 49% of the largest companies in Africa are South African headquartered companies. 49%. One country contributes 49% of countries out of 54. The fourth thing he said is, Abdullah, you live in a constitutional democracy that you often take for granted. And then lastly, he said to me, and this is what touched me, he says, you've got all of these six-pack factors, and you live in a country where 19 million citizens live below $1.50 a day. He says, I live in a country called India where 550 million people live below $1.50 a day. If you can't take all of these six-pack factors and fundamentally transform the lives of 19 million people, then you've got only yourself to blame. And I think that's when we've got to take this more coordinated view of what's the South Africa view of addressing social issues.
Well, I certainly want to play in that league that you spoke about now and not go elsewhere, right? It's an important point. I'll get to you in a second. Premier, let's talk about this part. You know, and we're not talking soccer. It's got nothing to do with. I'm looking at MC Lesupra. No, nothing about Swallows. Here's the point, right? But 2010 World Cup, which some of you have alluded to already, what was it? Leaving aside the many of us who love the game of football, it was South Africa committing itself to a world demand, meeting that demand in certain time frames, because the country was desperate to get it right, okay? It did it, okay? That's done. Why can we not create similar time frames, accepting, instead of trying to please the world, we please something you've said all along, you know, the citizens of the country. Meaning, how do we create very specific deadlines that are almost event created? Because somebody spoke about experiential existence and experiences. How do we create these events? Because residents don't really get it'll come one day. Why can't we not create these events coming up every year to say, in that period, because we're going to do something in your township, you mentioned Sedibeng earlier, we actually have a one-year deadline, we will do that, and the other. Can we not borrow from that experience?
Well, Ashraf, I appreciate that question, because what we call Ntirisano, which is also a fresh approach to how government drives delivery and solves problems in partnership with society. That program of Ntirisano, which we introduced in 2014, it's about doing precisely that. It's successful in some areas and less so in others. Where it has worked extremely well. It's often seen in public only from the point of view of what people are demanding from government. But we have amazing partnerships in different social areas. There's a team here of faith-based leaders who, on Ntirisano, they are partners on focusing on a range of issues, including social ills. And my own experience is that South Africans are thirsty to contribute. And I think when we engage with them as the provincial government and municipalities, we always convey this message very strongly. There are things we can do, but there are those you must do. For example, the issues about the keeping communities clean can't just be the business of government. Dumping in a whole range of places, protecting we built a clinic there. What amazed me was the Ennerdale community last week protecting. There was a group amongst them who wanted to burn down the facilities. The community members came out in an amazing way. They said, yes, we have problems. Yes, we want the leadership to come here, but no one is going to be allowed to burn down what we already have, which took us long. So I think I certainly agree that there is that thirst for leadership, and leadership must be a function of different sectors and spheres. Yes, political leadership is very, very important, but you need leadership in every sector. You need to act around common goals. And in our province, we have taken the National Development Plan and say, as it stands there, it may mean nothing, but let's break it down into what does it mean sector by sector area, geographic area by geographic area. What does it mean for the West Rand, for Sedibeng, for Ekurhuleni, for Tshwane, for Johannesburg? And what we are encountering is that the Ntirisano community outreach program is helping us to mobilize different sectors. We have taken it into the economy, what I was talking about earlier on. This is Ntirisano simply means working together. You know, the notion of working together is a galvanizing idea for South Africans. So in there may be people without money, but they have resources everywhere where they are located.
That's how we do it. All right,
and I think my appeal is that often as government we are put under a great deal of pressure, especially at community level, with very clear deadlines. When are you going to do this? When you turn that question around, an example I would give here is MEC Mashatile. A lot of communities we went to where people would have protested for housing, and we put a question to them. How many of you don't, if we give you a piece of land, how many of you would build for themselves? It was amazing for me. It was amazing how many people who have been calling for houses were saying, no, all I need is a piece of land. The rest we shall do for ourselves.
Okay, so
it's a paradigm shift. I know governments would love to be seen to be doing everything as part of patronizing citizens, but we need a paradigm shift that every time citizens say there are things, yes, that can only be done by government, but there are many sectors of society who are getting away with murder, so to speak, and I just borrow that because we are not flipping the coin to pose the question, so what can you do, even in a locality, that kicks people move into action.
What we're going to do, I think there'll be a chance for people to ask you questions just now. You can respond even further with that. Time's against us from a television point of view with regard to CNBC Africa. So we've got about 4 minutes left. So I'm going to maybe get all of you, maybe I'll start with you, Pamela, you had your hand up. Either say something or just give a closing remark. And maybe the central theme of all the things we've heard today, what's the one thing in your opinion that needs to happen and happen now? I'll probably put the same question, well, I think to all four of you, if you can do that, please. In maximum 1 minute, right?
Okay. I mean, my hand was up before because I wanted to comment on the issue of cohesion. I think we need to be very careful that we're not pursuing social cohesion for its sake. We really need to address the underlying tensions and the causes of why we are at this place, because I think it creates an opportunity where we can reflect on where we are as a country and then address what really needs to change. If we go on campaigns trying to let's come together, then we're going to make the same mistakes we made in the early 90s. We really need to address the challenges because the challenges are there and they are real. In terms of the one thing that needs to happen, I think implementation is so important. We've heard what the province has done and is going to do. We'd like to see them implement these strategies so that we can see the change that we're looking for.
Okay, it's a good word to leave it on implementation. Yours, you've got about 30 seconds, yeah?
Yeah, I would emphasize collaboration between different departments to problems, multi-departmental approach. And just to answer Ashraf on the low crime rates during the World Cup, there was an inter-ministerial committee to deal with crime. As I said, for the job exhibit, it could be something, a collaboration between community safety and human settlements. It worked well for us during the 2010
World Cup every day, maybe. Right, you got 30 seconds?
Issues of service delivery, but what is more important also is to put municipalities into the thinking of the province in the issues of service delivery, but more importantly, the trajectory that I've talked about.
Okay, got that very important point, and the Premier has made notes. Abdullah, 30 seconds from you.
I think what's critical, and I think there's been a big focus on the economy, is to be able to identify what are the growth opportunities in terms of driving economic growth that translates into jobs, that translates into more inclusive economic growth, and to identify what are some of those drivers sectorally, but also in some of the subsectors that will really start to drive economic growth, and to push within those areas to be able to create employment, especially towards marginalized parts of our society, and an area I'm particularly close to is young people.
Absolutely. Well, I think we all are. We certainly desperately need the young people on our side in our country. To the four panelists, thanks for your time. To the Premier of Gauteng, Premier Makhura, appreciate your input. That's it in terms of the panel discussion, and certainly that's been covered live on the CNBC Africa television. I understand even from CNBC's point of view, this is live. It'll be packages and news broadcasts around that as well in the latter parts of the afternoon as well as the evening. That all-important hashtag Gauteng Midterm is something you need to follow all throughout the day. Many of the media people, journalists here today, tweeting and commenting and giving opinions on that as well. What will happen later on, we're going to throw it open to the audience here, and they'll ask some questions. But before that, in preparation for that, a very short tea break, and then we'll join them. So that's it for now, coming to you from the Gauteng Government Midterm Review. Until later on.